Hi, welcome to Bathtub, where when you hear this iconic theme song, and we stop it pretty quick so we don't get sued by Peabody and Sherman. I'm not scared of Bullwinkle, but Peabody's he's a pain in the ass, and I don't want to put myself open to that guy and his lawyers. I'll tell you that. So anyway, this is what we call pointless adventures in literature. They come with a disclaimer. Sometimes they're pointless, sometimes they're meaningless, sometimes they're both pointless and meaningless, but they're always pointless, meaningless, or both, and you can bank on that here at the Bathtub. These are basically little reminiscences, sometimes of the recent past, as today, the very recent, almost today. They're almost reminiscences of today. Dodo, the Wonder Bird, if you've been watching, that she's getting worse. She's actually getting worse now that she's become a hot. Look at that hot. Isn't she a hot mama? Look at, she's got all her feathers are back, and she's just looking really hot. Come on, and pain in the butt. She doesn't start doing this, by the way, until I start talking. She does not start until I do this. I know. Here's your food. Tom Pynchon, he asks for you all the time. And these are pointless adventures. So I really debated on doing this at all, but I thought I kind of want to do it for the writers. So this is basically the story. The title of this pointless adventure is why I'm not going to review John Langan's work for the place I was going to review it for, and I'll tell you why that is. So as we know, we've talked a little bit about this. I've become a late life. I can't call myself aficionado, but an admirer of some horror writers. I blame S.T. Joshi for some of this and some of the great work that he and the people at Hippocampus have been doing with all the great weird tales writers like Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith. Joshi's writing the biography of Clark Ashton Smith, even as we speak. Very exciting. We're going to talk about that when it comes out. And I began to really like these writers in my late life. I never took horror fiction seriously most of my life. I hate Stephen King's books. We don't like to say negative things here. Okay, we don't like saying negative things about writers, but I can't read Stephen King, and I'm always wary of writers who say they do like Stephen King. Makes me nervous. I don't think I'm going to like their work. I think I'm usually right. Anyway, that's a long rambling thing that we don't like to say bad things here at the Bathtub. Stephen King is like a writer I don't really want to read. I find him kind of boring. He seems like a very nice guy. Lots of people love his work, and I'm really glad he's read in the Bathtub. People enjoy him. We're also total supporters of all these writers, and congratulations to everybody who loves Stephen King's work. That's great. Okay, but I can't read them. I used to use them in my classes. A lot of my students do remember this. I used to make fun of them. I used to not make fun of them, but I always use them as an example of plot devices, which I couldn't stand. I mean, the joke was the Stand. One of my students gave me the Stand once. He really loved this book. I talked about this, I'm sure, on this stupid show. And in the first scene, some guy gets exposed to somebody with some virus comes through the world, and everyone who gets it dies really quickly and horribly. And like they get all spotty and red, and then their head explodes or something ridiculous. The first 200 pages of the Stand, I swear to God, was Bob Johnson was walking down the street when he suddenly coughed, and then his head blew up and he died. Nurse Ratchet at the Wonderwall hospital was walking in through and then she goes through, and then we got 5-10 pages of her dying. It's one scene after another of people getting these horrible diseases and dying. Anyway, I couldn't finish these books. Anyway, so I sort of stayed away from horror fiction for a long time. I was starting to come back into it when I read. I talked about this. Ligotti was. I didn't know anything about Thomas Ligotti. This is my favorite Ligotti novel, Teatro Grotesco. I read quite a few Ligotti books, collects of stories. Most of his books are stories, and I'm a big fan of him. And this is my favorite of all the collections. I thought this was the one I just seemed to remember most vividly and enjoyed the most. But it was very unusual. It's horror fiction about one horrible thing, which is we're all going to die horribly. We're all going to do it. It's going to happen to all of us. We're all going to die horribly. And that's basically the underlying substance of most of these stories. But he creates these incredibly interesting and intricate and kind of beautifully written stories about that recognition. Anyway, so I liked him. I also a friend of mine and soon to he became a friend of mine. It's Brian Evanson. I got to know Brian, and I read one of his books years and years ago, and couldn't put it down. And I've read a couple of his books of stories, and they're very, very dark, like Langan. They're a little funnier. He's actually so funnier, and I really admired it. So I've really opened up to the idea of contemporary horror fiction writers. One of my oldest friends, Kim Newman, I don't consider him a horror writer. He writes kind of really intricately complicated comedies about movie buffs. They're just basically about ridiculous jokes about the movie business, and really fun, worked out well. But yes, he's known as a horror writer. So they're all around. There are lots of them who I know and I like personally. So anyway, that's a long way of saying that I heard a lot of good things about John Langan. I don't have all his books here. And this is one published by Hippocampus. They sent it to me, Saphira and Other Betrayals. I didn't get to read that one yet. I'm afraid I can't find them. I have a whole bunch of them around here because I went to the publishers and I talked to a magazine. There's a long daisy chain about how I ended up doing this. But I decided I'd heard he was really good and I wanted to read him. And so I wanted to do a project. I like that occasionally. I've told you about that. I just did Cavafy, and I wanted to just do a project and read all of his books. I wouldn't just read the new book. The new book, a collection of stories of his, is called Lost in the Dark. Let's give you all the details on this. He's a Bram Stoker award-winning novel of The Fisherman, and this is his newest collection of stories. It's got a big quote up from Kelly Link. It's got a big introduction by another famous, well-known contemporary horror writer, Victor Laval. And these are all his newest short stories collection. He's done quite a few short story collections, and he seems to be primarily a short story writer, particularly of longish stories. Anyway, this is a brand new book, and I was going to do a review of that. I can't find the other ones. His first book, I'm going to have to tie this up because I want to really talk him up to all of you who really like. If you like Stephen King, and you like contemporary horror fiction, then you really should read John Langan. I'm going to say my favorite things about John Langan in a minute. Let me see. I'm looking for where's Wikipedia. Okay, where would we be without Wikipedia? His first book, which is probably his best book of stories that I've read so far, is Mr. Gaunt and Other Uneasy Encounters, 2008. Mr. Gaunt is kind of a really good fun horror story. And there's another story in there that's kind of, I forget the title now. I don't have it with me. It's very good as well. So, let me say this. So I started reading him, and I read that first collection of stories, Mr. Gaunt and Other Uneasy Encounters, and I really enjoyed them. So I got somebody to let me do a review of him. I was going to review the new book, and I started to do my little project. So I read those first two stories, and I liked them very much, and I thought they were too long. This is my biggest criticism of every book and story, right? I always say the same thing. They go on too long or they lose their plot at the end. These didn't lose their plot. They were actually quite convincing stories. They really got you involved in the stories. I'm trying to remember them. I don't remember them vividly. One's a kind of they dig up some mummy and the mummy kills everybody, but it's much better than that description. And the other one is Mr. Gaunt, which is a long story about are they Scottish? I forget where they are, but they live somewhere, and there's a guy named Mr. Gaunt who's the servant, and there's lots of people. He does a lot of this stuff where various people remember a series of events, and this is members of the family of somebody who died or disappeared. I can't remember anymore. Anyway, Mr. Gaunt is sort of the central character, and we're basically the entire story. This is kind of a lot of horror fiction. Is waiting to open the door. I mean, if I was going to write an essay about these types of writers, I would say waiting to open the door would be the title. So we're constantly walking up to Mr. Gaunt's room and about to open the door, and then someone stops, and another story starts, then someone else is about to go up to the room to open the door. We have a lot of ways of kind of delaying that gratification of what's behind the door. Nagati does something completely different, which I don't want to talk about now because I can't remember exactly, but he takes that whole thing and spins it around. Anyway, that's the basic narrative plot of a lot of these stories. And you want to wait to find what happens, and when we go into Mr. Gaunt's room and see what's there, it's quite well done. Anyway, those two were very good. I then went on, I started reading some of his stories, other stories in the opening collection and others, which were about the same length, and they went on too long. And I got kind of bored waiting to go to the door to open the door. I can't give you more specific than that because I can't remember where I put the damn books. One of the reasons I didn't want to talk about this because basically I kind of gave up reading all of John Langan's work, even though I think many of you should read him. And I decided ultimately, I asked the people, I said, well, if I write about this writer, there's a lot of things I like about him, and there's a lot of things I don't. And I'm going to have to do both. I can't just say one. And they said, well, we don't want to do that. So I said, fine, I'm not going to do it. So I stopped doing it. Anyway, he also wrote a novel called House of Windows. And I want to say something good things about this book. It's another kind of horror story of waiting to see what happened to somebody. We're going to keep going to this someone's memories of what happened to some academic who disappears. And there's a house that he lives in, an old house. It's not haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by all these different windows. It's filled with glass windows. It's a big old house. And there's the idea sort of circulating that all these windows have kind of absorbed all these different energies and all these reflections, all these different psychological complications. And when people live in that house, things start to happen to them. That's the best I can do. I really liked a lot about this book. He does 2 or 3 things really well. And one of the things he does academics really well. It's very good. It's very good, honest. He's not belittling academics like most writers would do. He actually has very good sympathy for them. He also writes really well about troubled families who have been unhappy, children who have grown up in unhappy families. He does those really well. He reminds me a lot of a writer named Dan Chaon, Chaon, who I reviewed, and I may have talked about on this stupid show, who writes stuff that almost seems like it's a horror story. They're quite complicated stories. They're about as dark as any Ligotti story. And by the time the novel ends, you can't get out of it. Something horrible happens to all these people. He reminds me a little bit of The Vanishing, if you've ever seen the original, is it maybe Belgian horror movie? It's horrifying, but there's no supernatural, there's no ghosts. There's just a relentless logic to the way people destroy each other. Anyway, Langan reminds me that he does all that really well. About halfway through the book, I really lost the plot. I was starting to actually dread picking it up because I felt like there was so many delaying actions. At one point, one that comes to my mind. It's about people are, again, telling stories to people who tell the stories to someone else about what happened to somebody. Most of the novel is told by an academic's wife who was much younger than him. She was a student, all the kind of cliches of kind of awful academics. But they're done very sympathetically by Langan. He does them very well. And this younger wife is recounting how her husband kind of went crazy and what happened to him. And at one point, she's telling the story about what happened to this guy. At one point, she changes the subject and says, when I was a little girl, I went on a boat to look at whales. I think it's about 10 or 20 page scene. Or it's a 10 or 20 page narrative. And we go with this girl, and she tells the whole story about how she went out in the water, and blah, 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 it was a white day, blah, blah, blah. And we go through all the sort of descriptions. And after about 10 pages, we have this shake going underneath the water, and we have this, again, the whole narrative is to give us a sense of these vast subterranean forces moving through our lives. But my personal feeling as a writer, as a reader, he could have done the whole thing in a paragraph. It was, and I felt that a lot about a lot of scenes as the book progressed. I found it very hard to read the books. They started to remind me that the writer actually speaks highly of Stephen King, which I have to say put me off in the beginning, made me worried. And for that reason, I've started to find every time I read a Langan story, I started to feel I was being delayed so long, and I was very, very frustrated by it. So that's the reason I didn't decide to review them. That's probably me. I didn't want to spend a lot of time saying something I didn't like about the guy. I only wanted to talk about this, not to belittle John Langan and his excellent publishers. Their Word Horde did a really good job, doing a very good job with him, and lots of people really like him. Each one of these has introductions. Each one by some contemporary, Paul Tremblay, and there's another one. A bunch of horror writers who are talking about how much he means to them, what a great writer he is, and all that stuff. So he's very much established within the community of the horror writing world today. and you might want to know about them. Okay, but I couldn't. I don't think I will be able to read anymore. That's how I feel. I would definitely recommend, if you want to read anything of his first book of stories, and those 2 or 3 stories at the beginning. There's some other stories I do like. They tend to be fairly short and sometimes comic stories. And I really felt throughout much of House of Windows that this guy really had a great gift for his characters, and something I don't feel in Stephen King, which is the real sad fact of a lot of families, the sad facts of those families. And I think he did that very well. Okay, that was my pointless adventure. I really wanted to give all these books their credit and let people know about them, because I think many of you would really like these writers, particularly if you like Stephen King or Paul, or some of these other writers I mentioned. That you would probably like John Langan. Okay, stay safe. Dodo has been better. This is okay. I'm doing a bunch of these really quickly because we're going away for a few weeks.